Unit 2, Learning and Behaviour Development. Introduction. Learning is an important dimension of development. This subtopic deals with the meaning, principles, outcome, and implications of learning, employing a variety of theories including behavioral and cognitive theories. It is expected that the way we teachers understand what learning implies affect our teaching approaches. And as we know, choice of teaching approaches has effects on the quality of learning. Thus, you have to understand clearly from the different theories what teaching implies. Design and try out different teaching approaches and evaluate how they facilitate effective learning. Unit Learning Outcome. Upon completion of this unit, students shall be able to explain the general features, meaning, types, and factors of learning, appreciate the importance of learning in shaping students' development, use the behaviorist and cognitive theories to explain how learning occurs, design techniques to motivate and reinforce behavior, improve memory and transfer of training, instructional resources, liquid crystal display LCD and slides for projection, communication flip chart to show concept mapping, handouts, professional articles, and Ministry of Education mode directives, video or compact disc CD presentation devices, whiteboard, overhead projector, report, chalkboard, summaries, printed materials or any available but relevant to the unit, approaches, and modalities of unit delivery. The general approach that will be used throughout the course time will be experiential learning cycle, where the trainee will be active participant in gathering, processing, reacting, or reflecting and transforming information into usable knowledge. Thus, interactive methods like brainstorming, question and answer, small group discussion, demonstration, role play, independent reading and presentation by students, micro-teaching with emphasis on media utilization will be used. There will be gap lecture with intermittent question and answer time. Learners' activities. Actively participate in classroom brainstorming and discussion sessions on various learning theories, and its favorable implication to classroom settings. Student will do document search and library reading on topics, how a learner can use these learning perspectives into his learning preferences individually and in groups to be presented in class and discussed. Small group discussions and presentations individually reflect on the types of learning theories behaviorists and cognitivists conceptions and perspectives by giving examples from their own experience. Argue on the psychological foundations for learning theories and its implication for school settings and contexts. Arrive at general agreement the concepts, principles and classroom implications of human learning and development theories. Facilitators' activities. Prepare clear instruction for students on topics for reading and presentation. Facilitate brainstorming, presentations, role plays and discussion sessions. Present summary of basic understandings of brainstorming, presentations, and discussion sessions using available media materials like PowerPoint, overhead projection, whiteboard, chart or chalkboard presentations. Organize different groupings with gender impartialities both in membership and chairmanship of the team works. Show chart or diagram on topics that need to display the mind map and rational structuring. keeping following of students' learning progress in each sections or lesson, unit assessment techniques, observation of classroom participation with checklist of student activities like asking questions, giving comments, suggestions, errors made, correction of papers presented, correction result of short quiz at the end of the unit, self, peer and group evaluation of presentations and assignments. Section 2.1 Behaviorist Learning Theories Design Instruction, Teaching, Classroom Management and Behavior Modification. Overview. You are to develop an understanding of the behaviorist theories, particularly classical and operant conditioning, and use this understanding to analyze teaching. In your analysis, you are also to consider the quality of learning that is facilitated by this teaching approach. Learning outcome. After studying this section, you will be able to discerning elements of behavioral learning, analyzing teaching using these elements, identifying teaching techniques originating from the behaviorist approach, particularly from classical and operant conditioning theories, and evaluating how these techniques contribute in facilitating effective learning. Lesson 2.1.1 Classical Conditioning. The concept of classical conditioning was developed by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov 1849–1936. According to Papalia, Feldman, and Olds, they define the classical conditioning as classical conditioning is a type of learning which, based on the association of a stimulus that does not ordinarily elicit a particular response with another stimulus that does not elicit the response. From the definition above, we understand that the key element in classical conditioning is association. It means that if two stimuli repeatedly experienced together, they will become associated. For example, if a student frequently encounters unpleasant stimuli in mathematics class such as unfriendly teachers, difficult questions, and a lot of homework, he may learn to dislike mathematics. Pavlov's experiments. Pavlov discovered classical conditioning almost by accident. Originally, he wanted to study the role of salivation in digestion. He measured how much saliva dogs produce when given meat. After a few days in the experiment, Pavlov noticed that the dogs in his laboratory started salivating when the lab attendant entered the room with the meat dish, before meat was placed in their mouth. This aroused Pavlov's curiosity and he pursued the issue with more experiments. For example, he sounded a bell just before presenting his dogs with food. After hearing the bell many times, right before getting fed, dogs began to salivate as soon as the bell rang. In other words, dogs had been conditioned to salivate in response to a new stimulus, the bell, that normally would not produce salivation. Dogs had learned to associate the bell with food. Types of stimulus and response. Stimulus is an observable environmental event that has a potential to exert control over a behavioral response. A response is an overbehavior by a learner. Put it in a simpler way, a stimulus is anything that can directly influence behavior, and the stimulus produces a response. In classical conditioning, there are two types of stimulus and two types of response. They are unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and conditioned response. common phenomena in classical conditioning. There are 3 common phenomena in classical conditioning. They are generalization, discrimination, and extinction. The descriptions for these phenomena are explained below. Generalization. Generalization occurs when similar stimuli to a CS produce a CR. A student may generalize his fear to physics and chemistry tests, although he had performed poorly only on mathematics test. In this case, the physics and chemistry tests were similar stimuli to the mathematics test, and they produced the CR by themselves. Discrimination. Discrimination is the opposite of generalization. It refers to the ability to differentiate between similar stimuli. For example, a student may feel fear during mathematics test, but not during physics or chemistry tests. This shows that the student is able to discriminate between appropriate and inappropriate situations for a response. Extinction. Extinction is the process of unlearning a learned response because of the removal of the original source of learning. In classical conditioning, extinction is done by repeatedly presenting the CS without the US. This action will decrease the frequency of previously CR. Eventually, the CR disappears. In the example mentioned above, if the student repeatedly passes the mathematics tests, his fear of mathematics tests will disappear. Lesson 2.1.2 Operant Conditioning. Operant or instrumental conditioning is a form of learning in which the consequences of behavior lead to changes in the probability that the behavior will occur. Thorndike 1874-1949 was a pioneer in studying this kind of learning. His famous formulation of law of effect lies at the heart of the operant conditioning. The law of effect states that behavior that brings about a satisfying effect reinforcement is apt to be performed again, whereas behavior that brings about negative effect punishment is apt to be suppressed. Types of reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is a consequence that increases the probability that behavior will occur. On the other hand, punishment is a consequence that decreases the probability behavior will occur. Put it another way, reinforcement will strengthen a behavior, while punishment will weaken a behavior. Section 2.2 Cognitive Learning Theories. Overview. It is true that some behaviors are acquired through classical and/or operant conditioning, but there are aspects of our psychological makeup that can also be acquired through cognitive learning. Cognitive learning theories expound the holistic nature of learning rather than the reductionist approach. The 4 major theories are Bandura, Piaget, and Vygotsky, and Brunner. In this subtopic, you are to revisit and sharpen your understanding about cognitive learning theories, especially ideas by Albert Bandura, Piaget, Vygotsky, and Brunner, and use this understanding to design teaching activities that enhance active learning in your class. In thinking about the quality of the activities you design, you should consider concepts such as active learning, cooperative learning, peer tutoring, apprenticeship, contextual and situated learning, learning outcome. After studying this section, you will be able to designing learning activities basing on the cognitive learning theories, assessing their effectiveness in facilitating active learning. Cognitive psychology focuses on the study of how people think, understand, and know. They emphasizes on learning how people comprehend and represent the outside world within themselves, and how our ways of thinking about the world influence our behavior. From a cognitive learning perspective, learning involves the transformation of information in the environment into knowledge that is stored in the mind. Learning occurs when new knowledge is acquired, or existing knowledge is modified by experience. Among the main issues studied and discussed by cognitive psychologists are the cognitive theories present a positive view of development, emphasizing conscious thinking. The cognitive theories, especially Piaget's and Vygotsky's, emphasize on the individual's active construction of understanding. Piaget's and Vygotsky's theories underscore the importance of examining developmental changes in children's thinking. The information processing theory offers detailed descriptions of cognitive processes. In-text questions: what are the differences between behavioral and cognitive perspective pertaining to human learning? 2.2.1 The theory of Bandura and observational learning theory. Social learning theory extends behaviorism. Both behaviorism and social learning theory agree that experience is an important cause of learning. They also include the concepts of reinforcement and punishment in their explanation of behavior. Furthermore, they agree that feedback is important in promoting learning. Egan and Korkak, 2007. Observational learning. Most of the principles of the social learning theory were developed by Bandura, Papalia, Olds, and Feldman, 2007. Social learning theory believes that students learn by observing or watching and imitating other people. This process is called modeling or observational learning. According to Hinrichs, observational learning is so common and so powerful. Hinrichs, 2004. One of the most important examples is the effect of watching violent media and its effect on developing aggressive behavior in children. The newer version of social learning theory is called the social cognitive theory. The change is due to a greater emphasis on cognitive processes and learning. According to Bandura, both social and cognitive factors play important roles in learning. Bandura, 1989. There are 4 processes involved in observational learning. These include attention, retention, production, and motivation. Process 1. Attention. Before students can imitate a model's behavior, they must pay attention to what the model is doing or saying. For example, seeing a teacher writing from the same perspective as the students see their own makes observational learning easier. Process 2. Retention. To produce a model's action, students must be able to store the model's action in their memory for future retrieval. Students' retention will be improved when a teacher gives vivid, logical, and clear demonstrations. Process 3. Production, to attending and remembering. Students must be physically capable of reproducing the model's action. Here, the students need a lot of practice, feedback, and coaching before they can reproduce the model's action. Process 4. Motivation. The students must be motivated to demonstrate the model's action. Reinforcement can be used to encourage observational learning. For example, a teacher can use direct reinforcement such as saying "good work." Alternatively, a teacher may want to use vicarious reinforcement. In this case, a student may simply see other students being reinforced for a particular behavior, and then he increases his own production of that behavior. Reciprocal determination model. Bandura developed a reciprocal determination model that comprises 3 factors. The factors are behavior, person, and environment. Behavior, environment, and person factors interact to influence learning. They influence and are influenced by each other. For example, a teacher's feedback environment can lead students to set higher goals, person/cognitive, and these goals will motivate students to put more efforts behavior in their studies. Activity 1. How would observational learning be useful to you as a teacher? 2. What are some contributions and criticism of the social learning theory? 2.2.2 The theory of Piaget. Jean Piaget, 1896–1980, was a biologist who originally studied mollusks, publishing 20 scientific papers on them by the time he was 21, but moved into the study of the development of children's understanding through observing them and talking and listening to them while they worked on exercises he set. His view of how children's minds work and develop has been enormously influential, particularly in educational theory. His particular insight was the role of maturation simply growing up in children's increasing capacity to understand the world. They cannot undertake certain tasks until they are psychologically mature enough to do so. His research has spawned a great deal more, much of which has undermined the detail of his own, but like many other original investigators, his importance comes from his overall vision. He proposed that children's thinking does not develop entirely smoothly. Instead, there are certain points at which it takes off and moves into completely new areas and capabilities. He saw these transitions as taking place at about 18 months, 7 years and 11 or 12 years. This has been taken to mean that before these ages children are not capable, no matter how bright, of understanding things in certain ways, and has been used as the basis for scheduling the school curriculum. Whether or not should be the case is a different matter. Piaget's key ideas: adaptation, what it says, adapting to the world through assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation, the process by which a person takes material into their mind from the environment, which may mean changing the evidence of their senses to make it fit. Accommodation, the difference made to one's mind or concept by the process of assimilation. Note that assimilation and accommodation go together. You can't have one without the other. Classification, the ability to group objects together on the basis of common features. Class inclusion, the understanding, more advanced than simple classification, that some classes or sets of objects are also subsets of a larger class. E.g., there is a class of objects called dogs. There is also a class called animals. But all dogs are also animals, so the class of animals includes that of dogs. Conservation, the realization that objects or sets of objects stay the same, even when they are changed about or made to look different. Decentration, the ability to move away from one system of classification to another one as appropriate. Egocentrism, the belief that you're the center of the universe and everything revolves around you, the corresponding inability to see the world as someone else does and adapt to it. Not moral selfishness, just an early stage of psychological development. Operation, the process of working something out in your head. Young children in the sensorimotor and pre-operational stages have to act and try things out in the real world, to work things out like count on fingers. Older children and adults can do more in their heads. Schema or scheme, the representation in the mind of a set of perceptions, ideas, and/or actions, which go together. Stages of cognitive development. Sensorimotor, birth 2 years. Differentiates self from objects, recognizes self as agent of action, and begins to act intentionally, e.g. pulls the string to set mobile in motion or shakes a rattle to make a noise, achieves object permanence, realizes that things continue to exist, even when no longer present to the sense base. Bishop Berkeley, pre-operational 2-7 years, learns to use language and to represent objects by images and words. Thinking is still egocentric, has difficulty taking the viewpoint of others, classifies objects by a single feature, e.g. groups together all the red blocks regardless of shape, or all the square blocks regardless of color. Concrete operational 7-11 years, can think logically about objects and events, achieves conservation of number age 6, mass age 7, and weight age 9, classifies objects according to several features, and can order them in series along a single dimension such as size. Formal operational 11 years and up, can think logically about abstract propositions and test hypotheses systematically, becomes concerned with the hypothetical, the future, and ideological problems. The accumulating evidence is that this scheme is too rigid. Many children manage concrete operations earlier than he thought, and some people never attain formal operations, or at least are not called upon to use them. Piaget's approach is central to the school of cognitive theory known as cognitive constructivism. Other scholars, known as social constructivists, such as Vygotsky and Brunner, have laid more emphasis on the part played by language and other people in enabling children to learn. And the combination of neuroscience and evolutionary psychology is beginning to suggest that the overall developmental model is based on dubious premises. It's too early to give. 2.2.3 Gestalt Psychology. Gestalt as a perspective focuses on the belief that human consciousness cannot be broken down into its elements. This approach to psychology was founded on the concept of the Gestalt, or whole. Gestalt psychologists originated from the work of Max Wertheimer 1880-1943, and his students Wolfgang Kohler 1887-1967 and Gert Kofker 1886-1941, who have made substantial contributions to our understanding of perception. Gestaltists pointed out that perception has meaning only when it is seen as a whole. Plural Gestalten is German for pattern, figure, shape, or form. It is used to refer to wholes, systems and complete structures, rather than the reductionist approach of seeking ever smaller components of a phenomenon. In learning, Opposed to the reductionism of behaviorism, it concentrates on the way in which the mind insists on finding patterns in things, and how this contributes to learning, especially the development of insight. Gestalt psychology is a theory of mind and brain that proposes that the operational principle of the brain is holistic, parallel, and analog, with self-organizing tendencies, or that the whole is different from the sum of its parts. The Gestalt effect refers to the form-forming capability of our senses, particularly with respect to the visual recognition of figures and whole forms instead of just a collection of simple lines and curves. Figure 5.4 shows an example of picture that contains a Gestalt theory. The word Gestalt in German literally means shape or figure. Gestaltists performed many researches on perception and human learning. They believe learning is the result from good perception, which enable an individual to form correct concept in their mind. Later on they proposed the principles or law for perceptual organization,